The lock on my front door has a specific, satisfying click. It's a sound I've known for years, the sound of sanctuary. It's the sound of leaving the chaotic, unpredictable world behind and stepping into a space of order, a place where things make sense. I build things for a living. Not skyscrapers or sprawling complexes, but furniture. I take raw, unruly timber and give it form, purpose, and a quiet, enduring strength. I plane away the rough edges, join the pieces with precision, and sand them until they are smooth to the touch. I build things to last. A marriage, I thought, was no different. My wife, Alara, was the antithesis of my quiet, ordered world. She was a whirlwind of vibrant energy, a supernova in a world of pale, distant stars. When she entered a room, the center of gravity shifted to her. Her laughter wasn't just a sound. It was an event, a cascade of joy that seemed to pull everyone into its orbit. For years, I was her anchor, the calm center she revolved around. And I loved it. I loved being the quiet man who had somehow captured the sun. But the sun can burn. The shift was gradual, an almost imperceptible cooling. It began, as these things so often do, with a whisper. A new friend from her book club, a man named Julian. At first, his name was just a footnote in her stories about her day. Julian said the most insightful thing about the author's use of symbolism, she'd say, her eyes sparkling with an intellectual fire I hadn't seen in a while. I was happy for her. I encouraged her to explore new interests, to make new friends. I was a supportive husband. I was a fool. Soon, Julian was no longer a footnote. He was a recurring character. Julian and I grabbed coffee after the meeting. Julian recommended this amazing new restaurant. Julian thinks I should take up painting again. Julian. The name started to feel like a splinter, a foreign object lodged just beneath the surface of our life. Then came the day she sat me down on the sofa, the very one I had built with my own two hands. She held my hand, her touch light, almost hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. "I've been seeing someone, Julian." She said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, as if she were announcing a change in our dinner plans. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just felt a profound, bottomless silence open up inside me. "It's not what you think," she continued, her words rushing to fill the void. "It's just different. You and I, we have this life, this routine. It's comfortable. But with him, it's exciting. It makes me feel alive. Different." The word landed like a stone in the quiet pool of my heart. I was the sturdy, reliable oak. He was the bolt of lightning. And she, it seemed, was tired of the shade. I nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. I listened. I absorbed. And in that moment, I began to plan. I am a builder, after all. But I also know that sometimes, before you can build something new, you have to clear the land. And sometimes, that requires a controlled demolition. Now, tonight, her different was here. Standing on my porch, a monument to my failure, a testament to her betrayal. He had a look I recognized, a veneer of cheap confidence that couldn't quite mask the deep-seated insecurity beneath. He was a piece of badly made furniture, all flash, no substance, held together with glue and wishful thinking. He didn't wait for an invitation. He brushed past me, stepping over the threshold as if he were crossing a finish line. His cologne, a cloying, synthetic scent that smelled of ambition and desperation, filled the air, a violation of the clean, honest scent of sawdust and wood polish that usually permeated my home. "You've lost, man. Just accept it," he said, his voice a grating parody of masculine authority. He looked around my living room, at the handcrafted bookshelves, the mortise and tinted joints of the coffee table, the life I had so carefully constructed. She deserves someone who can actually take care of her. Someone who's not weak. Weak. The word hung in the air, a lazy fly buzzing around my head. I didn't sweat at it. I stood there, arms crossed, leaning casually against the doorframe I had hung with my own hands. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I let him ramble, letting him feed on his own ego like a peacock in full, glorious display. It was almost amusing, watching him strut around my living room as if he owned it. He commented on my furniture, a bit rustic, don't you think? My taste in art, interesting choice. Even the beer in my fridge, you actually drink this stuff. Meanwhile, Alara sat silently on the couch, her eyes darting between us like a spectator at a tennis match, unsure of whose court the ball would land in. I couldn't tell if she was embarrassed, amused, or secretly enjoying the spectacle. But one thing was clear, She wasn't going to intervene. She had brought the storm to my door, and now she was content to watch it break. So, I let him talk. I let him mock me, belittle me, and puff himself up like a rooster in a henhouse. Because while he saw himself as the alpha, the dominant force, I saw something else entirely. I saw a man too drunk on his own arrogance to notice the profound, deceptive calm before the storm. And oh, was the storm coming? I've always believed in patience. It's a skill honed over years of coaxing stubborn wood into beautiful, functional forms. It's the art of waiting for the right moment, of knowing when to apply pressure and when to let the material settle. Patience is what kept me standing there, arms crossed, while this self-proclaimed alpha, this Julian, paraded through my home, delivering insults wrapped in the guise of faux wisdom. "You're too quiet," he said, narrowing his eyes at me. "That's why she's with me. Women want someone who takes charge. You look like you just take whatever's thrown at you." I nodded, pretending to ponder his words. I watched him the way a carpenter watches a warped piece of lumber, assessing the stress points, the grain, the inevitable fractures. He mistook my silence for submission, a classic mistake of the loud and insecure. You see, I've learned that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to fill the room with noise and bravado. True power waits. It observes. And when the moment is right, it acts decisively. As he continued his monologue, a torrent of self-aggrandizing nonsense, I observed him closely. His posture was all bluster, a forced confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. His movements were jerky, restless, and the way he glanced at Alara, a constant, needy flicker of his gaze, as if seeking her approval for his performance. Everything about him screamed insecurity masked his arrogance. I let him think he was winning, that he was in control. "Man, I almost feel sorry for you," he chuckled, leaning back on my couch, the one with the hand-stitched leather I had sourced from a small tannery in Italy. "But hey, look on the bright side. You're free now. You can start over. Maybe with someone more your level." I smiled faintly, keeping my eyes fixed on his. He didn't know it yet, but every word he uttered was just another turn of the screw, tightening the tension, bringing him closer to the breaking point. Every smirk, every laugh, every arrogant gesture was fuel for the storm brewing inside me. And then there was Alara, sitting there with her arms folded, a silent, complicit audience. She hadn't said much since the circus began. Her silence was more damning than any word she could have spoken. Did she feel proud of this man, this hollow vessel of a man she had brought into our home? Did she feel guilt? Regret? I couldn't tell. But her indifference, her willingness to let this play out, spoke volumes. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, the air in the room growing thick and heavy. But I refused to let it crush me. Instead, I let it sharpen my focus, hone my resolve. The house felt smaller with him in it, like his ego was sucking all the oxygen out of the room. But I remained calm, collected. Because storms don't announce their arrival with a sudden thunderclap. They start with a subtle shift in the wind, a quiet, pregnant stillness that hangs in the air. That's where I was now. In that stillness. Watching. Waiting. Eventually, he grew bored of his own voice, his well of insults running dry. He turned to me, a look of smug expectation on his face. "So, what do you say, man? Are you ready to let go of your pride and move on? It's better for everyone if you do." I unfolded my arms, letting a small, almost imperceptible smile play on my lips. "You're right," I said calmly, my voice even and measured. "It's time I accept the situation." He blinked, momentarily thrown off by my agreement. He didn't realize the trap he had just blithely walked into. I extended a hand, gesturing toward the door. "Why don't we step outside? I'd like to have a word with you, man to man." The smug grin returned to his face as he stood, eager to continue his charade of dominance. "Now we're talking," he said, clapping me on the shoulder as if we were old friends. I didn't flinch. I led him toward the door, my steps deliberate and unhurried. The calm before the storm was over. It was time to let the winds howl. As we stepped onto the driveway, I glanced back at the house. Alara stood in the doorway, her arms still folded, her expression unreadable. Good. Let her watch. She needed to see what happens when you bring chaos into a man's sanctuary. The storm was about to break. And I was ready. The driveway was no longer just a stretch of asphalt. It had become a stage, and I had carefully chosen the perfect backdrop. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in angry strokes of orange and purple, casting long, menacing shadows that stretched across the pavement. The air was heavy, charged with the kind of tension you can almost taste, the kind that precedes a summer thunderstorm. Julian stepped out confidently, his chest puffed out like he was walking into a prize fight he'd already won. "So," he said, rolling his shoulders, a display of theatrical machismo. "You finally grew a spine, huh? Took you long enough." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence build, a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to suck the air out of the evening. I let the weight of my gaze, cold and unblinking, settle on him, cutting through his paper-thin arrogance. His smirk faltered for a moment, a brief flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with another quip. "Look, man," he continued, pacing back and forth like a caged wolf, all nervous energy and wasted motion. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Just admit you can't compete, and we'll call it a day." I tilted my head slightly, watching him as one might observe a particularly loud, obnoxious peacock. His bravado was entertaining, but it was also predictable. He wanted a reaction, anger, frustration, maybe even a desperate plea for him to leave. What he didn't realize was that I had no intention of giving him what he wanted. "You're right," I said evenly, my voice a calm, steady counterpoint to his nervous energy. "This doesn't have to get ugly. But you've been walking around my house, disrespecting me, and now you're on my driveway, acting like you own the place. So, let's settle this. Right here, right now." That threw him off balance. He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing, a confusion clouding his features. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I replied, taking a slow, deliberate step closer, "if you want to prove you're the better man, show me. Right here." His laughter echoed down the quiet street, a sharp, grating sound that made my fists itch to clench. "You want to fight me?" he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Come on, man. You're out of your league." But he didn't back down. His ego, fragile and overinflated, wouldn't allow it. Instead, he took off his jacket, a cheap leather thing that probably cost more than it was worth, and tossed it onto the hood of my car like he was gearing up for a sparring match. "All right, old man," he said, cracking his knuckles with a theatrical flourish. "Let's see what you've got." What he didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment, not just physically but mentally. I am a man who works with his hands, who understands the principles of leverage, balance, and force. While he had been strutting around like a rooster in a henhouse, I had been quietly calculating, strategizing, and waiting. I stepped onto the driveway, centering myself, my movements slow and deliberate. The evening air was cool against my skin, but inside, I was burning with a cold, clear purpose. This wasn't about proving my masculinity or reclaiming my pride. It was about drawing a line in the sand, a boundary that he had so arrogantly crossed. It was about defending the sanctity of my home, the order of my life, and showing him, in Alara, that I was not the doormat they had assumed me to be. He squared up, raising his fists in a sloppy imitation of a boxer's stance. "Let's make this quick," he said, grinning, a flash of white teeth in the dying light. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on the rhythm of my breathing, the solid weight of my stance, and the absolute, unshakable clarity of my purpose. The stage was set. The audience, my wife, a silent, frozen silhouette in the doorway, was watching. The first punch came fast, a clumsy, telegraphed swing fueled by ego rather than skill. I sidestepped with an economy of motion that seemed to surprise him, letting his momentum carry him off balance as I remained rooted, calm, and ready. His bravado was all bluster, no substance. And for the first time, I saw the flicker of genuine doubt, of fear, in his eyes. The stage was mine now, and the performance was just beginning. It started with a swing, a wide, clumsy arc of overconfidence. He lunged at me like a bull charging at a matador, a chaotic explosion of misplaced aggression. He expected me to cower, to stumble, to retreat. But I didn't. I stepped aside with a calculated precision that seemed to defy his understanding of the situation, letting his own momentum carry him off balance. "You're quicker than I thought," he muttered, recovering with a smirk that barely masked his surprise. I didn't reply. Words were a currency he dealt in, a cheap and inflated one. My silence was my own. It wasn't just a refusal to engage. It was a weapon, a cold, sharp blade slicing through his bluster with every unspoken moment. He came at me again, this time with a flurry of punches, a desperate attempt to overwhelm me with sheer volume. I blocked the first, a jarring impact against my forearm. I dodged the second, feeling the air whisper past my ear. And I caught his wrist mid-swing on the third. His eyes widened as my grip tightened, a grip accustomed to the unyielding nature of oak and maple. I twisted, using the principles of leverage I understood so well, forcing him to his knees. You call this strength? I asked, my voice a low, cutting whisper in the quiet evening air. I released him, and he stumbled backward, clutching his arm. The smirk was gone now, completely erased, replaced with a raw, primal mixture of frustration and fear. Lucky shot, he spat, shaking out his wrist. Let's see you handle this. He charged again, a wild, uncoordinated assault. This time, I let him come. His body collided with mine, but I absorbed the impact. My feet planted firmly on the ground I owned. I twisted, using his weight and momentum against him, and he hit the ground hard. The thud of his body against the asphalt a satisfying punctuation to his arrogance. I stepped back, giving him space to get up, to reevaluate his life choices. You've got all the bark, I said, dusting off my hands, but no bite. That did it. His face, already flushed, turned a deep, angry crimson. He let out a guttural yell as he scrambled to his feet, a cornered animal now, all thought and strategy abandoned in favor of pure, mindless rage. He came at me again, swinging wildly, his movements sloppy and desperate. I dodged with an almost contemptuous ease, each miss sapping his strength, his confidence, and feeding my cold, steady resolve. When he stumbled, gasping for breath, his lungs burning, I moved in. A precise, calculated strike to his shoulder sent him spinning, and a quick, clean sweep of his legs brought him down again. This time, I didn't step back. I knelt beside him, pressing a forearm to his chest to keep him pinned, the hard muscle of his chest a poor substitute for the solid feel of oak beneath my hands. Listen carefully, I said, my voice cold and steady, each word a carefully placed chisel against the granite of his ego. You're in my house, on my property, trying to take what's mine. That's not bravery. It's stupidity. He struggled beneath me, a pathetic, thrashing movement, but I pressed harder, letting the weight of my words, and my body, sink in. You think you're the alpha? I asked, leaning closer, my face just inches from his. The strongest man in the room doesn't need to prove it. But you're nothing but noise. A loud, empty noise in a quiet, ordered world. For a moment, he stopped struggling. The fight, the bravado, the arrogance, it all drained out of him, leaving behind a pathetic, broken shell of a man. I stood, leaving him sprawled on the ground, his pride in tatters, his body a canvas of bruises and scrapes. I didn't look back as I walked toward the house. Alara stood in the doorway, her expression a mask of shock and something else I couldn't quite decipher. I met her gaze, my own cold and unyielding, and said only one thing. Clean up your mess. Behind me, he groaned, a low, pathetic sound as he tried to stand. The alpha was broken, his limbs battered, his ego shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. The duel was over. The storm had passed. But the damage left in its wake, the wreckage of a life we had built together, had only just begun to be assessed. I turned to Alara, standing frozen in the doorway, her face a pale, ghostly mask in the twilight. She looked as if she'd just witnessed a familiar, placid landscape suddenly erupt into a volcano. She wasn't prepared for this version of me, quiet, deliberate, and unflinching. For weeks, she'd likely believed I'd accepted my role as the defeated, passive husband. Maybe she'd even found a strange, twisted comfort in the idea that I was too weak, too complacent, to react. But now, she couldn't ignore the truth staring her in the face. I wasn't defeated. I told you to clean up your mess, I said again, my voice sharper this time, cutting through the stunned, heavy silence of the evening. Her eyes darted to the driveway, where her so-called alpha was now arriving, pathetic heap, trying to pull himself together. It was almost pitiful. Almost. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, her arms hugging herself as though trying to shield her body from the cold, harsh wind of reality. What were you thinking? I asked, stepping closer. My voice was calm, but the weight behind it, the cold, hard steel of it, made her flinch. Bringing him here? Into my house? Her mouth opened, a small, soundless "oh," but no words came out. She glanced back at the driveway, a desperate, fleeting look, as if hoping her knight in shining armor would miraculously recover and say something, anything, to save her. He didn't. I thought. She began, her voice a shaky, trembling whisper. I thought you didn't care. That made me stop. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting her words hang in the air between us like a poisonous flock. Didn't care. I repeated slowly, the words feeling foreign, absurd on my tongue. You thought I didn't care because I didn't shout? Because I didn't make a scene when you told me about him. She looked away, a flush of guilt finally creeping into her pale cheeks. I didn't know you'd. Didn't know I'd what? I interrupted, my voice still quiet but now honed to a fine, sharp edge. Defend my home? Defend myself? You think silence means weakness, Alara? That calm means indifference. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, a flicker of what might have been regret, or perhaps just self-pity, crossed her features. But regret wasn't enough. Not now. You invited this, I continued, gesturing to the driveway where her boyfriend was finally, painfully, dragging himself upright, clutching his side. You thought I'd roll over and let him take everything? My house? My dignity? You underestimated me. And now you're standing here, pretending to be shocked. She opened her mouth again, a desperate attempt to explain, to justify, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said, the single word a command, not a request. Don't try to explain. Don't try to justify it. Just answer me this. Was it worth it? Was he worth it? Her lips trembled, and tears, the first I'd seen from her tonight, welled up in her eyes. But she didn't answer. Maybe she didn't have one. Or maybe the truth was too painful, too ugly, to admit. Behind her, Julian limped toward his car, a parody of the swagger he'd arrived with, avoiding my gaze as though looking at me might shatter whatever shred of pride he had left. I didn't stop him. Let him leave. Let him take his broken limbs and his battered ego somewhere far, far from here. I turned back to my wife. This was your choice, I said, my voice steady, resolute. You brought him here. You let it get to this point. And now, you have to live with what comes next. She reached out, a tentative, pleading gesture, as if to touch my arm. But I stepped back, out of her reach. I didn't. She started, her voice barely above a whisper. Didn't what? I asked, my tone colder now, glacial. Didn't think I'd fight back? Didn't think I'd remind you who I am? Tears streamed down her face as she stood there, wordless, a statue of regret. For the first time, I saw the deep, undeniable cracks in her confidence, the terrifying realization that she'd gambled and lost, spectacularly. I walked past her, back into the house I had built. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I simply closed it behind me, the familiar, satisfying click now sounding like the locking of a tomb. I left her to face the wreckage of her choices alone. She wanted me to accept her different. Well, now she'd have to accept mine. Inside the house, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching as the so-called alpha male, this paragon of masculine virtue she had chosen, finally managed to limp his way to his car. He glanced back once, a wounded, pathetic look, probably expecting me to come out and shout something, to finish him off with a final, crushing blow of words. I didn't. His humiliation was already complete, a self-inflicted wound. My wife, Alara, stood in the driveway, still frozen in place. She didn't move to help him. She didn't call out his name. She just stood there, her arms hanging limply at her sides, as though the weight of her decisions had finally, irrevocably, caught up with her. I leaned against the counter, sipping my water, letting the silence settle over the house like a thick, heavy fog. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was the kind of silence that forces you to confront every bad choice, every word you shouldn't have said, every action you shouldn't have taken. Eventually, she came inside. Her steps were hesitant, tentative, like a child sneaking back into the house after breaking curfew. She stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. You didn't have to do that, she said softly, her voice cracking. I set the glass down with a soft click, turning to face her. You're right, I said, my voice devoid of the anger that had fueled me just moments before. It was replaced by something colder, heavier. I didn't have to, but I did, because you brought him here. You gave him permission to disrespect me, to walk into my house and treat me like I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. I didn't know he'd act like that, she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself, a gesture of self-preservation. I didn't think. No, I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended, the anger flaring for a moment. You didn't think. That's the problem, Alara. You just acted. She flinched, and for a moment, a flicker of the old guilt, the old instinct to comfort her, stirred within me. But I pushed it down. That wasn't my job anymore. I told him to leave, she said after a long, pregnant pause. I told him it was over. I raised an eyebrow. And that changes what, exactly? Does that erase what happened tonight? Does that rebuild the trust you shattered? Her shoulders sagged, and she looked down at the floor, at the pristine hardwood I had laid with my own hands. I don't know, she admitted, her voice a ghost of a whisper. I thought. You thought I'd sit back and let him take everything, I said, finishing the sentence for her, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. You thought I'd accept it because I didn't yell, because I didn't throw a tantrum when you told me about him. You mistook my silence for weakness. She didn't respond. What could she say? The truth, raw and ugly, was laid bare between us, and there was no way to dress it up, no pretty excuse that would make it any less grotesque. I didn't fight him for you, Alara, I said finally, breaking the heavy silence. I fought him because he believed he could walk into my home, into my life, and take what he wanted without consequence. This wasn't about you. It was about me. It was about standing my ground. Her eyes, filled with fresh tears, met mine, and she reached out, a tentative, pleading gesture. I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't, I said. Not yet. She nodded, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. I turned back to the sink, staring out the window at the now empty driveway, at the darkening sky. The storm was over, but the aftermath, the cleanup, the assessment of the damage, that was just beginning. We both knew there were no easy fixes here, no magic words that would make everything go back to the way it was. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted it to. The next morning, the world outside felt mockingly unchanged. The sun still rose, casting long, golden fingers across the lawn. The birds still chirped their indifferent melodies. But inside my house, the air was thick, heavy with the unspoken words of 100 unsent letters. Alara and I moved around each other like two planets knocked from their orbits, bound by a shared gravity but unable to find our old, familiar paths. I went about my day as though nothing had happened, a quiet breakfast, a quick, unseeing glance at the morning paper. But as I sipped my coffee, I noticed the occasional curtain shift from the neighbor's house across the street. By lunchtime, the subtle glances had turned into outright, unashamed stares. Word had traveled faster than I'd anticipated. I wasn't surprised. Fights, even quiet, contained ones, rarely stay contained in small, insular neighborhoods. What probably started as an innocent observation, a strange car in my driveway, a heated discussion on the porch, had likely snowballed into a juicy, neighborhood-wide scandal by now. Everyone probably had their own, embellished version of the story. Asterisk, did you hear? He beat his wife's lover senseless, threw him out of the house. Asterisk, or, apparently, his wife was cheating, and he went full action hero on the guy. I didn't care about the gossip. Let them talk. But as the day wore on, I started noticing the shift in how people looked at me, how they treated me. When I stepped out to get the mail, Mr. Henderson from across the street, a man who'd barely given me a cursory nod in years, raised a hand in a slow, deliberate acknowledgement, his smile tinged with something that felt like a strange, masculine respect. Another neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman who walked her yappy little dog past my house 3 times a day, stopped to say hello. Her tone was kind, but her eyes, sharp and curious, carried a mix of sympathy and cautious admiration. It was as if, in their eyes, I transformed overnight. I was no longer just the quiet carpenter who minded his own business. I was now the man who stood his ground, who defended his pride and his home. But admiration wasn't the only reaction I noticed. There were the whispers, too, the hushed, urgent conversations that would abruptly stop when I walked by. There were the fleeting looks of pity, or perhaps judgment, from people who had only a sliver of the story. I could almost hear their thoughts. What kind of man lets his wife disrespect him like that? Or, asterisk, you must have seen it coming. You can't be that blind. Asterisk. By evening, Alara finally broke the thick, suffocating silence. She'd been pacing the living room for hours, her anxiety a palpable, vibrating force in the house. Have you noticed, she asked, her voice hesitant, shaky, the way people are looking at us? I didn't look up from the book I was pretending to read. Let them look, I said, my voice flat. She stopped pacing, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. You don't care? I set the book down, meeting her gaze for the first time that day. Care about what? What they think. They weren't the ones who invited a hurricane into my house, Alara. Her face crumpled slightly, and she looked away, unable to hold my gaze. It's not about them. I continued, my voice low but firm. It's about you. About me. About what happens next. She sank onto the couch, her hands twisting together in her lap, a nervous, repetitive motion. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She looked small, almost fragile, a stark, painful contrast to the confident, radiant woman who'd once told me she was seeing someone else like it was a casual, exciting change of plans. For a moment, a brief, fleeting moment, I felt the old, familiar urge to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But that wasn't my job anymore. She'd made her choices. Now, she had to face the consequences. Figure it out, I said simply, picking up my book again, the words on the page a meaningless jumble. The rumors, the whispers, the stares, they would fade eventually, replaced by some new neighborhood scandal or drama. But the damage inside this house, the wreckage of the life we had built together, that wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The days following the driveway incident were quiet, but it was a heavy, loaded quiet, the kind that carries the weight of unspoken words and unresolved emotions. My wife, who once moved through our home with an air of casual, effortless confidence, now seemed like a ghost, a visitor unsure of her place. She spent most of her time in the kitchen or the bedroom, avoiding me unless it was absolutely necessary. When we did cross paths in the hallway, her eyes would flick to mine for a brief, guilt-ridden moment before darting away, as if the sight of me was a painful reminder of everything she had done, everything she had broken. I wasn't avoiding her, not actively at least. But I wasn't seeking her out, either. I let her sit in the silence. I let her feel the full, crushing weight of what she had brought into our lives. This wasn't about punishing her, not in a cruel, vindictive way. It was about giving her the space, the silence, to confront the consequences of her choices, to look in the mirror and see the person she had become. One evening, I found her sitting at the dining table, the one I had built for our first anniversary, staring at her phone with an empty, vacant expression. She didn't notice me at first, and I took the opportunity to observe her. Her shoulders were hunched, her usually perfect, elegant posture now sagging under a burden that was invisible but clearly immense. When she finally looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, she hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. Before she spoke, "I ended it," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting her continue, letting her fill the silence with her confession. With him, she clarified, as though there were any doubt. I told him it was a mistake, that I wasn't thinking clearly. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms, my expression unreadable. Her lips pressed together into a thin, tight line, and she looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. "And?" I prompted, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I don't know what to say to you. I don't even know where to start." "Start with why," I said, my voice calm but firm, each word carefully chosen, deliberately placed. "Why you thought this was okay? Why you thought I wouldn't care? Why you thought he was worth risking everything we had built?" Her eyes, when she finally looked up, were filled with a deep, bottomless well of tears. But I didn't move to comfort her. "Not yet. I don't know," she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing. "I was bored, I guess. Or maybe I just wanted something different." That word again. Different. It sat between us like a wall, high and insurmountable, built brick by brick with her lies and my naivete. "I didn't think it would go this far," she continued, her voice shaking, the words tumbling out in a rush of belated regret. I thought you didn't care anymore. That we were just going through the motions, that we were roommates, not husband and wife." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, letting the injustice of them sink in before I responded. "You thought I didn't care because I didn't shout, didn't throw things, didn't make a scene. But that's not who I am, Alara. I don't scream. I build. I fix. I act. And when you brought him here, when you let him stand on my property and disrespect me, you gave me no choice but to act." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming, a silent, steady stream. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I don't want to lose us. I don't want to lose you." Her words, which once would have moved me, which would have stirred something deep and protective within me, now felt hollow, empty. "I don't know if there's an us left to save," I said honestly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You didn't just hurt me, Alara. You disrespected me in my own home, in front of someone who had no right to be there. You shattered the very foundation of what we were." She nodded, her tears falling freely now, spotting the polished wood of the table I had so carefully crafted. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said desperately, her voice a raw, pleading sound. "Just tell me how to fix this." I straightened, pushing off the doorway, the wood solid and unyielding beneath my hand. That's not for me to decide, I said, my voice firm, final. You're the one who broke it. It's your job to figure out how to put it back together, if it even can be. I walked away then, leaving her alone at the table with her tears and her regrets. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, or even anger. It was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Fixing what she had broken was her burden to bear, not mine. And as I walked up the stairs to the bedroom that no longer felt like ours, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to help her carry it. In the weeks that followed, I didn't go out of my way to make her life difficult. I didn't have to. The weight of her own actions was already doing that for me. Every room she entered seemed to grow heavier with her presence, her guilt hanging around her like a thick, suffocating cloak. I, on the other hand, focused on myself, on reclaiming the parts of my life that had felt dulled, neglected, or overshadowed by the comfortable, predictable routine of our marriage. I started waking up earlier, going for long, punishing runs in the crisp morning air, and spending hours at the local gym, the burn in my muscles a welcome distraction from the ache in my heart. The physical effort wasn't just an escape, it was a reminder of who I was before the chaos began, a man with discipline, strength, and an unwavering control over his own body, if not his life. Meanwhile, she tried. I could see it in the small, hesitant gestures. The way she'd linger around the kitchen when I was cooking, a silent, hopeful presence. The way she'd leave little, handwritten notes on my desk, filled with apologies and promises, always careful not to push too hard, not to ask for too much. She was walking on eggshells, a stranger in her own home, unsure of how to bridge the vast, silent chasm she had so carelessly created between us. But I wasn't ready to meet her halfway. Not yet. Her subtle, almost timid attempts at reconciliation came in waves. One evening, she brought home my favorite meal from a small Italian restaurant we used to love, a place we hadn't been to in years. She set the table with our best china, lit candles, and even put on the old jazz record we used to listen to on rainy Sunday afternoons. It was a perfect recreation of a life that no longer existed. Another time, she suggested we watch one of our favorite movies, a silly, romantic comedy we'd seen a dozen times. She set up the living room with blankets and popcorn, a nostalgic tableau of a happier time. I participated in these small, staged moments of normalcy, but I kept my distance emotionally. I wasn't cruel about it. I didn't ignore her or brush her off completely. But I made it clear, with my silence, with my carefully measured responses, that things weren't going to go back to the way they were just because she was trying. My detachment was its own form of revenge. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was effective. It forced her to sit with the discomfort, to confront the consequences of her choices every single day, in every silent, shared space. One afternoon, I decided to clean out the garage, a task I'd been putting off for months. As I sorted through old boxes filled with forgotten projects and dusty shelves lined with cans of wood stain, I came across a photo album from our early years together. Flipping through the pages, I saw the smiles, the moments of unadulterated joy, the life we'd built before everything unraveled. She came out to check on me, a tentative "can I help?" on her lips. She stopped in the doorway when she saw the album in my hands. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, a brief, fleeting moment, it felt like the crushing weight of everything between us had lifted. "I miss those days," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a deep, profound regret. I closed the album, the sound of the cover shutting echoing in the quiet garage. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. "I do too," I said, my voice even. "But you made a choice, Alara. A choice that pulled us away from them." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, a sight that had become all too familiar. "I know," she whispered. I want to find our way back." I leaned back against the workbench, the solid wood a comforting presence at my back, and crossed my arms. "Then start by being honest," I said, my voice low but firm. "With yourself, and with me. Why did you really do it? Because if it was just boredom, as you said, there were 100 other ways to deal with that. Ways that didn't involve bringing another man into our home, into our life." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the concrete floor. Then she took a deep, shaky breath and looked at me, her eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty I hadn't seen in years. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was afraid that we'd grown apart and didn't even realize it. That we were just existing. And instead of talking to you about it, instead of facing that fear, I did something stupid. I did something destructive. I thought. I thought if I made you jealous, if I created a little chaos, it would wake us up. It would force us to feel something again. Her words, her twisted, misguided logic, hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because they excused her actions, they didn't, but because they revealed just how lost she had been, how deeply she had misunderstood the quiet, steady nature of my love. I wasn't asleep, Alara, I said, my voice firm, unwavering. I was here. Every single day. I was here, giving everything I had to this marriage, to us. You didn't wake me up. You broke something. Something that might never be fixed. She wiped at her face, her tears falling silently now, a river of regret. I'll keep trying, she said softly, her voice filled with a desperate, fragile hope. Even if you don't believe me now, I'll keep trying. I nodded, picking up the photo album and placing it back in the box, a relic of a time that felt like a lifetime ago. We'll see, I said, my voice steady, non-committal. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even a promise. But it was a step. Whether that step led us back to each other or further apart was still undecided. For now, in the quiet, dusty garage, surrounded by the ghosts of our past, that was enough. It took months, a slow, arduous crawl through the wreckage of our marriage, before the air in the house felt truly breathable again. The tension, while not completely gone, had dulled into something quieter, something manageable, like the low, distant rumble of a storm that has already passed. Alara continued her efforts to mend what she had so thoroughly broken. I could see her sincerity in the small, consistent gestures, in the way she carried herself now, no longer overly confident, but deliberate, cautious, acutely aware of the fragility of what remained between us. I, too, found myself in a place of deep, introspective reflection. The fire of my anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a strange, quiet clarity. I wasn't entirely sure what forgiveness looked like, or if I was even capable of it. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I didn't want to live in the suffocating shadow of bitterness forever. Holding on to that anger felt like carrying a heavy, jagged stone in my chest, and I was tired of its weight. One evening, as I sat on the back porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, she joined me. She was carrying 2 cups of tea, the steam rising in delicate, fragrant wisps into the cool night air. She placed one on the small table in front of me without a word and sat down in the adjacent chair, folding her hands in her lap. For a while, we just listened to the symphony of the night, the chirping of the crickets, the occasional, mournful hoot of an owl, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. When we got married, she said finally, her voice soft, contemplative, I thought love would always be easy, that it would always feel new and exciting, like it did in the beginning. But I know now that I was wrong. I was a child playing with grown-up emotions. I glanced at her, but she wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on the dark, distant horizon, her expression thoughtful, pensive. I know I hurt you, she continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength. I know I betrayed your trust in a way that can't be undone. And I don't expect you to forgive me just because I want you to. But I need you to know that I've learned. I've changed. And if there's even the smallest, most fragile chance that we can rebuild what we had, I'll keep fighting for it. I'll fight for it every single day. Her words, stripped of their former desperation, now imbued with a quiet, resolute sincerity, hung in the air between us, heavy with truth. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with. Not the hollow, insecure person she'd become over the last year, but the woman who had once looked at me with nothing but a deep, unwavering love and admiration. I don't know if things will ever be the same, Alara, I said honestly, my voice low, measured. But I'm willing to try. Not to go back to what we had before, because that life, that version of us, is gone. But maybe we can build something better. Something stronger. Something built on truth, however painful. She turned to me then, her eyes wide, glistening with a hopeful, unshed tear. Do you mean that? She whispered, her voice a fragile, trembling thing. I nodded, taking a slow sip of the tea she'd made. It was warm, soothing. I do, I said. But it's not going to be easy. We both have to be willing to put in the work, to be honest, to be vulnerable. I'm ready, she said quickly, her voice trembling but firm. I'll do whatever it takes. For the first time in months, I felt a small, cautious sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something far more fragile, far more precious. It was the beginning of something new. In the days that followed, we started small. We had conversations over breakfast that didn't end in a heavy, suffocating silence. We took walks around the neighborhood that felt less awkward, less strained with each step. Slowly, piece by painstaking piece, we began to clear the rubble and survey the foundation of our marriage. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of what had happened threatened to drag us backward into the darkness. But each time, we made a conscious choice to move forward instead, to choose each other, to choose the possibility of a shared future, despite the deep, indelible scars of the past. The driveway, once the stage for our greatest conflict, the physical manifestation of our shattered trust, slowly became a symbol of our resilience. It wasn't just a place where I had defended my pride, my home. It was a place where we had confronted the truth, raw, ugly, and unvarnished. And while the road ahead was still long, still uncertain, one thing was clear: we were willing to walk it together.